Welcome to the WorkJoy Jam. In this episode, I'm talking to Simon Jones. Simon is actually somebody I used to work with, and he's been so involved for many, many years in high performance sport, which is often called upon in business to look at where can we get better, how can we take the lessons from this. And I thought it'd be really interesting to talk to Simon, who works in this world, and to consider all of his advice over many, many years of working here. And some of the great things we talked about here was a lot around authenticity, being yourself, and also vulnerability, and how it's one of those things that in other people we really admire it, but in ourselves we find it really awkward and horrible and don't like it, and that difference in what we admire versus what we see in ourselves. And also Simon's approach, which very much I think echoes the WorkJoy theory of life, that you need to find the passion in what you're doing right now. And I call it the love the one you're with factor, that nobody's situation is perfect, but there are great things in almost every situation. So it's about finding them and making that choice to see those great things. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to the WorkJoy Jam. Today we have Simon Jones joining us, and I'm really excited to hear from him and all of his experience across sport and leadership and his great thinking. So I'm going to let Simon introduce himself, because people introduce themselves a lot better than anyone else can. And I'm going to ask Simon to tell us who he is, what he does, and his story so far. So Simon, over to you.
Hey Beth, great to hook up with you again. Spent some time at the LTA, which I thoroughly enjoyed. So my story is I was a professional tennis player, not so very good that I set the world alight, but that led me into a career in tennis coaching. I did that I was a private tennis coach for about 10 years. And then after that stage of my career, I was finding I was coaching some, my preference was working with talented tennis players. So that procured me a job as a national coach with the Lawn Tennis Association. So I started to work for the national governing body of tennis then. And that lasted for 31 years, that employment with the LTA.
Just a short gig there.
Yeah, just a short gig. They couldn't get rid of me. But the interesting thing for me during that time was I had probably eight different jobs within the organization, from being a national coach, into leadership roles. I was head of performance support at the National Tennis Centre for one stage, which meant that I was overseeing sports science, sports medicine, talent identification, and a wide range of subjects that look after our very, very top tennis players. And I also, during that time at the LTA, I spent 4.5 years sitting on the executive of the governing body as well. So it was 30 years. It was a long stint, and many joke that you get less for murder, but it was a long stint. And you know, I finished doing that in August 2019. I look back on my time at the LTA with tremendous affection, not only because the subject of the matter was professional tennis players and working with elite athletes, but what that attracts is an amazing dedication in the people around them. So the opportunity to work for so long with people that had so much dedication to the cause was tremendously rewarding. And the diversity of roles I had, from, as I said, from national coach through to an executive role, that diversity of roles gave me a tremendous learning and skill set. That at the time you don't realize you're developing it, but it gave me a tremendous experience to look across not only the technical aspects of sport, but leadership and the wider business. So that was my career at the LTA, and I finished working there in August 2019, and then started a private working as a consultant. And now I'm working in professional football, mostly in football. I do four things actually. I'm the head of coach development at Chelsea Academy, Chelsea Football Club. I'm the strategic coaching advisor for the Premier League. I'm the performance advisor for Chelsea women's team, And I also maintain a private coaching business where I coach individuals in sport and education. So, got a multitude of things I'm doing now. Keeps me very busy. But I have to say, the opportunity to use all of my skills and experiences that I learned at the LTA, I'm finding it thoroughly rewarding. So that's me, Beth.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your story so far. And it sounds like some really exciting projects and work in football and beyond football in sport, um, with a real portfolio of different things that you can use all of your different skills on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I went into Chelsea Academy specifically to work with the coaches in developing them as coaches and as practitioners. But because my skill set was wide, I've been involved in things like developing a strategy for the loans team. The football is big business. There's a lot of money at stake with these footballers. And we wanted to get a much better, more organised strategy with how they loaned the players out and how they looked after
Yeah.
them. So I had that strategic part. The Premier League, the work I do with the Premier League, they asked. It was funny. I left the LTA, and the week after they asked me to write their coaching strategy. Which
Yeah.
was a year-long piece of work. So immediately left the LTA. I was smack right back in the middle of some strategic work. So the balance of working with coaches and the strategic work, and then the team development of the coaches, a tremendous diversity of work that I've got. And really rewarding, that aspect of it. Actually, lots of different people. I do a little bit of work with the Chelsea women's team. And that's a sport that's at a different phase to the men's game, as many would know. So that's exciting as well, because that's almost like a startup.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I also really love my private coaching, and I do a bit of work with some coaches in America. The sadness of the lockdown period and COVID has actually enabled many more virtual connections,
Yeah.
and that's enabled me to work with some coaches in the NBA, the National Basketball Association. So yeah, my feet don't touch the ground, but I love every minute of it.
It sounds like it. And I'm really fascinated to hear more from you. And I'm going to ask you some questions in a moment. But one thing that just really struck me there is how we can all assume that because people are coaches, they can coach themselves and that they get it. But actually, there's something for me that kind of everyone needs a coach and guidance and support and mentoring and all of those different things as well.
Oh, absolutely. And in the future, it will only grow. I mean, if you take the sort of the football model, we have a staff of about 25 coaches working with something around. Well, they've got over 300 million pounds worth of footballers out in the field right now.
Yeah.
So, if you've got 25 people working with 300 million pounds worth of assets, you need to look after those people.
Yeah.
And when I say I coach them, I coach them in many aspects: their leadership skills, their personal efficacy, the way in which they present, and then the more technical aspects and the pedagogical aspects around their coaching. So it's not just looking at the way they run a football session; it's looking at the whole person as a coach. And particularly in high pressure environments, because I've spent most of my life at the top of pro sport. In high pressure environments, people are there's a lot of pressure on them.
Yeah.
And to have support and confidence building is an essential part of the work that I do with them. Um,
Amazing.
it's very competitive, and it's a dog eat dog sort of environment. So encouraging them to be vulnerable and open up and share, and it's something that they don't normally get the opportunity to do. It's a unique environment.
Yeah, and right at the top of that elite level. And as you're saying there, a huge amount of investment and money in the assets. And the assets are people, and the coaches are the people who look after the people, and someone needs to look
Absolutely,
after the coaches.
absolutely, yeah, most
Yeah,
definitely.
amazing. So I'm going to ask you now to kind of veer into the world of work joy and how we all individually, as teams, as leaders, can really develop that sense of joy in our work and what for you are some of the things that you think about for joy at work? What gives you that joy? And also, what do you find you help other people with as kind of the coach who helps coaches?
Well, there's definitely a parallel, of course, because when I help other coaches, I tend to say that I've just got a whole bag of mistakes in my life, and I just don't want you to make them.
Yeah.
So of course, the way in which I've approached my life is the foundation of how I'll help others. So you're very on point there. I think the best way to sum it up, I mean, I could talk for ages about this one, but the best way to sum it up is an expression. There's an expression of, find something that you're passionate about.
Yeah.
Do something that you're passionate about. Well, I actually don't really believe in that, because that's great if you can do it, but realistically, it's not possible in many instances. And I'd always had
Yeah.
the sort of the idea that be passionate about what you do. So rather than looking for the perfect situation all the time, find the passion in actually what you do, because nobody's situation is perfect, but there are great things in every situation. So I'd always believed in trying to find the passion in what I did. And
Yeah.
when I started off my career as a private tennis coach, and in those days we didn't have any indoor facilities, Beth, it was in the freezing cold and gloves, and in order to generate the interest of people at all levels when you're a private tennis coach, you have to have some great enthusiasm. And I can remember in the early days of this making a decision that, I'm either going to do this or not do this. And actually, the way in which you can do it is to be really passionate about it, and that it will rub off and it will have an influence on people around you. And as a consequence, they will come back for more tennis lessons, and I will establish a business.
Yeah.
And I can remember that moment very, very well. Bizarrely, I can even remember where I was sitting when I had that conversation with myself. Thought I was a bit mad. Nowadays we'd call it self-reflection, but it was. I had to do it in order to make my business work, and then I've kept that up for forevermore. Actually, and it's you've got to find the passion in what you do, as much as looking for something that you're passionate about.
Yeah. We're so aligned on that, Simon, because not everyone can work in a job that they feel 100% passion for. There are going to be people out there. And in fact, I think most people, it's probably 1% of people who get to live and work and in their true calling, in their true passion, and are able to make money from it and live the life that they want to live. Most people work in a job that they might care about a bit or not care about at all or care about a lot, but it's not everything that they're looking for, because what they're skilled at might not be what they're passionate about. What they've got a background in and experience in might not be what they're really passionate about. What they're passionate about might be something that never actually let you earn any money. Like I would love to spend my days just like playing with all the dogs in the world, but that's not gonna actually be a career for me. So
Absolutely.
and I you call it like be passionate about what you do. I often think in song titles, and I call this one the Love the One You're With
Yes.
song.
Don't start
That old
singing it. It's a
chestnut.
great track.
I won't start singing it now, maybe later on. But there's something here about there is great things in all jobs, I believe. And I talk to lots of different people about this, even jobs that you might think are like, wow, that sounds really dull. Different people find different things exciting. And sometimes it is about reflecting and understanding. I love the idea, have that conversation with yourself. What is it that will make this work for me, that will bring the joy for me, and really working on it from that way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, I'm not the spiritual sort, but I do believe that if you take that approach, then then the things that you are passionate about tend to come your way. The two things come hand in hand. But it's in life we talk a lot about decision making, and the first decision that you make is whether to enjoy something or not.
Yeah.
The things, making an effort, being passionate about something, all of these are decisions that are in our control, and one has the opportunity to control them. If you let others control them for you, that's not the right place to be. These are decisions that you make, to see the good in something, to find the joy in it, and to find the passion in it, you can make that decision. It's not easy. Anybody listening to this will think my life has been an easy ride. It's not. You have really tough times too. Um, but actually, it's a decision that you make that is the majority of the time for you.
Yeah. And that's so true, is that the decisions or the choices that we make are up to us. And so often I think we allow people, or we make the assumption that it's other people influencing some of those things versus us really kind of sitting there and going, actually, this is what I want to do. I find a lot of people are like, oh, well, my boss is really difficult, therefore I can't find any joy at work, or I'm in this job that I don't, I'm not really passionate about, so I can't find any joy. And it's
Yeah,
not really in that binary world. There's a whole
yeah.
like colorful world in between good and bad that we can find ways of working. And you're so right. From my perspective, there is no such thing as 100% joy all the time. It's just, that's not realistic. That's not the human experience. There are going to be highs and lows, and it's so much more about appreciating the highs and finding ways to get the highs, as well as understanding that the lows don't last forever.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I was, very lucky in my time to be involved with athletes that won world championships in tennis in juniors, and so the ideals that one uses with athletes, they apply very well to this context that we're talking about, Beth, because I'll say I'm at my worst when I'm complaining and when I'm blaming. I'm at
Yeah.
my worst when I'm complaining and when I'm blaming. Athletes are at their worst when they're complaining and when they're blaming. And I will absolutely say, of course, I've blamed other people and complained about other people, but I've been fortunate enough in working with the athletes that I have, to realize that that's the wrong way and to make the choice not to do it. You know, and if you look at it, if you look at the negative side, if you look at the negative side of one's career, the list is long. If you want it to be, it's a long list, but it'll just kill you and suck you of energy. So why make that choice?
Yeah.
Why make that choice?
And that's the kind of, take the bull by the horns, take ownership of your life, take ownership of how you show up, how you respond to things that have gone well, and understand them and unpick them and know what's good, and understand about what's gone badly, and be able to let some of that stuff go, be able to learn from it, and keep that constant growth mindset of understanding that actually every time you get something wrong or it doesn't go your way, you can learn something from that process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another big thing for me was authenticity.
Mm,
I was lucky enough in one stage of my executive life at the LTA to have been given a coach by the organisation, and this person really helped me understand how much energy it was not being, how much energy I was using not being authentic.
yeah.
And it's something that I taught, as you said at the start. I pass on what I've learned to other people, not to try to impose myself on them, by the way, but an authenticity is absolutely paramount. You have to be yourself. Nobody's better in the world at being you. It's something that people need to embrace and be as authentic as they can, because it releases an energy in you that's a fantastic feeling.
Yeah.
But we don't know it in the work environment. We're acting, we're trying to be something that we're actually not, and there's so many people are around like that. So the people that always worked for me, I always tried to get them to be authentic, and
Yeah,
be the real them.
and that is such good advice. And I, one thing I always reflect on in my own career when I worked in organisations, for organisations versus running my own business is. If I look back over my career, every time I had a successful career move, had a successful moment, had a big thing that went really well, whatever measures of success you put in place for yourself, whenever I got promoted, whenever, the opportunities came to me, it was always at the moments I decided to be myself, to be
Hmm.
authentic, to
Yeah.
be me, were the moments when those things happened. The
Hmm.
moments when I felt more stuck in a rut or I didn't get things right were all the moments when I was trying to adapt myself to be different or to be something that I thought someone else wanted, versus just going with my version of what it should look like.
Absolutely. And having worked with you, Beth, I can absolutely endorse that in you. I saw that in heaps.
Oh, thank you, Simon. That's such a nice thing to say. I really appreciate that. So, thinking about your kind of guidance to others, obviously authenticity really important for both making things work and joy and all of the things that we want in successful times. You're working with these amazing coaches who are coaching some of the best athletes in the world right now. How do you go about helping them find that balance between the and you talked quite a lot about that pressure that they're under, and it must be an immense pressure to kind of win on the field, and there must be a lot of blame towards the coaches when things don't go right. How do you help them to see the benefits and to get the joy and to balance that pressure being a good thing versus pressure being an overwhelming thing?
Okay, so I have a sort of a 3-point approach with the people that I work with, which I'll share with you in a second. But one of the tools I use within it is to try to understand what's stressing you, because stress is everywhere. We all have stress, and it has an amazing effect on us. It can have a positive effect if it's in the right way, but it often has an energy sapping effect, and over time it can be really debilitating.
Yeah.
So, helping people understand what's stressing them and then identifying those areas and doing something about it is a really, really good tool. And that worked for me personally really well. Actually, it was one of the things that helped me a lot at a stage when I was struggling a little bit. But my three-pronged attack with people are around vulnerability, self-awareness, and critical thinking. So, the vulnerability is, so how can I best describe it? If I'm vulnerable to you, I feel it as weakness. But if you're vulnerable to me, I see it as a strength of yours.
Yeah.
So vulnerability is courage, it's strength. It opens your mind up to an immense amount of learning, but it also creates empathy with the people that you're vulnerable with, because if you open up to me, I'll open up to you, and you get that, you get in the sort of inside the real important parts of a relationship then. And the higher you go up in your industry, the harder it is to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
But what happens is the ones at the very top, they're very vulnerable. So nobody asks me more questions than the very top people I work with.
Yeah.
So and it's curious. You'd think they'd ask less. And I definitely think there's a parallel between the fact that they have the ability to be curious and the confidence to be vulnerable and the success that they have. So vulnerability is the first thing. Self-awareness is absolutely critical, and self-reflection and the ability to sit back and understand what your preferences are. Your emotional intelligence, the effect of your behavior on others, how you respond to things, how you feel about them. That is really, really important as well. Without that tool and without an enhanced ability to do that, you'll struggle because you'll keep things bottled up and you won't realize what's going on. And then finally, critical thinking is very important in sport coaching, and I believe it's very important everywhere. And to simply define critical thinking, we get data, and we have opinions. So too often people just take data at face value. They'll be told
Yeah.
something and they'll just accept it, or they'll form an opinion of something. Critical thinking encourages them to actually do neither, but to really think about it and to think about the options and where it's come from and why that's being said, and really scrutinize things. And working with the people that I work with, those three elements are always in and around my practice with them.
Yeah.
And critical thinking is, that's where I'll give them the most challenge, because the best question you can ask anybody is why.
Yeah. It's like that start with why. Why are we here? What are we doing? Really think about the
Connect with your
background to it.
why. Connect with your
Yeah.
why. I mean, people. If you had one tip, if you said, "Si, you've got one tip," it would be connect with your why.
Yeah.
Actually, identify why you're doing what you're doing.
And why you're doing those decisions and all of those things. And those first two, coming back to them, I totally agree. And this thing idea that vulnerability is something we admire in other people but really hate about ourselves.
Yes.
It's such a weird human, and I see it in almost everybody has the same thing. It's that if you open up to me, I'm like, wow, you're amazing. I love this. It's so brave and so courageous. And then, for yourself, you go, oh no, I couldn't possibly do that because it's too much risk and there's too much going on. But yet we see it and admire it in others. So definitely vulnerability, being able to have that and that curiosity and empathy. Totally. Yeah.
And
It's so interesting.
if somebody is listening and say, well, how do I be more vulnerable? It's a very easy answer. You just say to people, what do you think?
Yeah.
What do you think? And immediately that simple question unlocks a whole host of emotions and opportunities by just asking that simple question.
Yeah. Or even just saying something like, I don't have the answer.
I don't know. Can you help me?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Can you help me?
Yeah.
And people always, I think, are often scared to ask that "Can you help me?" question because they think everyone's going to say no. But when people come and ask you for help, it's actually like a really, it can be a really great thing. You feel like you're important, and you feel like it's that people value your time and your energy. And equally, I don't think people say no that often when you actually genuinely ask them for help. So definitely
I've never
one to
seen it.
work
I've
on.
never seen anybody say no, and we all love to be asked our opinion and things. So
Yeah.
the emotional, the social capital in those simple questions is immense.
Yeah.
It's immense.
And the second part, I think, your idea about this self-awareness is definitely something that's so important to understand yourself, to give yourself some time to understand your preferences, what you like to do, how you like to work, and then to also have the understanding that you can't use those just as an excuse as to why you can't do things or why you won't do it. So sometimes people get a bit aware, so they do self-awareness level 1 is what I kind of call it, which is my preference is to do things in this way, and then they go, oh, because my preference is to do this in this way, I will no longer do things or try anything else other than the way that I'm trying it.
Yeah.
So for me it's self-awareness, but if you really want self-awareness to work, it's actually acting on what you know about yourself and letting yourself grow from that position.
Yeah, yeah. Look, and there's so many layers. There's endless layers you can look into it. But again, one of the things that I would say that's really common in the top people that I work with is they not afraid to question themselves, and they're not afraid to ask people what they think, but it also
Yeah.
doesn't second guess their beliefs.
Yeah.
So it's a key feature, because some people when they sort of self-reflect or ask others' opinions, they completely change direction.
Yeah.
And then they change direction again, and they change direction again. I think when I work with my people, I always want them to understand their true beliefs first, actually, because
Yeah. And so
otherwise
that
they'll
they can
just
stay
go off.
authentic then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And the third point you make there about critical thinking, again, a fascinating thing. And I see so many people either being driven by data, completely by data, or by their own opinions, versus this idea that you can actually really unpick what are the situation we're in, what's the why, what are we trying to achieve, and to go a bit deeper. And I wonder how much of our, and this is more of a putting it out there as a big question, how much of what we do or don't do around critical thinking is around how time poor people are to actually stop
hmm
and reflect and consider and think.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, definitely time. Uh, yeah, I mean, so yeah, absolutely. I mean, empathy is another one that comes to mind. Empathy is linked to that critical thinking because it's trying to give consideration to how it affects others and what others might be thinking.
Yeah.
rather than my opinion, or the facts say this, so we've got to do this. What I've learned, and boy, am I learning all the time. What I've learned is that other people's views can be very different to mine,
Yeah.
and that's actually a good thing. Shocking as it may seem to myself.
And you know what? The other thing is they might be very different and they might be right and you might be
They
wrong.
may well be right, and most of the time they are right.
Yeah. And that's the thing, isn't it? Is that sometimes we get into a zone where we're a bit afraid to ask for other people's opinions because we kind of want to go with our own versus
Yeah.
who else has got something to say. But surely in this world and where we're at, that when you're looking at, especially in things like sport or in business or actually in any industry where you're trying to achieve something, you're trying to deliver something, is that more perspectives will ultimately, if you can really work with them, lead to a better, more considered answer.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. No doubt about it. Well put.
But again, I always think about this: the time poor people trying to find time to properly listen and input and understand other opinions gets harder in some zones when you're under that pressure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's right. I mean, the pressure that people are under not to do this. It takes a really big character to step back and do this properly. And I've had the privilege to work with some really good people in football like that.
Yeah. And to say let's really make this work and change how we do things to make it better.
Yeah.
Right. So some thinking. It's amazing to see your kind of 3 point, maybe 4 point if we add empathy in, but we can count that under other things. Your real philosophy there. And when you're thinking about this, one of the things you said was around you're always learning. How do you make sure you keep learning? Because I think that's a great way of getting joy into your life, is to keep learning new things. You've had obviously a great long career with lots of different roles, lots of different perspectives in it. How do you stop yourself from getting into that zone of, oh, I know everything now, I can stop learning?
Um, well, I'm very lucky in as much as at my stage of my life, when I finished a 30-year career with one organisation, most people then don't just wind down. But I found myself right at the bottom of a steep learning curve in a totally different
Yeah.
sport. So that in itself has helped supercharge my appetite to learn, because if I didn't learn really quickly, I wouldn't have been able to float here.
Yeah.
The next thing I would add to that is the tragedy of COVID and the lockdowns created a massive explosion in learning.
Yeah.
So that was helpful as well. I have a few learning tools that I use that I recommend for others, and to help me learn and develop in what I'm doing. So one of the learning tools is like three hooks, and the three hooks represent my philosophy. So when we were talking about vulnerability, self-awareness, and critical thinking, I could listen to 10 podcasts, for example, Beth, and
Yeah.
if four of them have something related to those hooks, then I'll capture it.
Yeah.
But if they're not related to those hooks, I just nicely consume it and let it go away.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And then another tool that I use is something called three things. So whenever an event happens, or I go to an event, or I have a meeting, or anything, I consolidate it down into three core takeaways, and those take and just three. So the process of doing it is important there.
So really kind of honing it down into the three key messages or takeaways or
Yeah,
things that you
no more
kind
than
of took from
three.
that.
No more than three. And then what I do is I keep them in an electronic notebook, which is relevant here, because with electronic notebooks like OneNote and Evernote, they're available on all your devices. So if I'm on a tube train and I'm bored, as most of the time I am on a train, I can just flick through my phone and I'll go to 3 things, and I'll revisit and retrieve the information very, very, very quickly. And then I'll sit there in the train thinking about that event and recalling it. And then the final thing that I do with my people is it's based on something called the Ebbing House forgetting curve, which is a bit of research, and it's fundamentally how much information you've lost after 20 minutes, and after an hour, and after a day, and after 2 weeks. So it's this concept of retrieval. So if I do a workshop with somebody, within 3 days, I'll send them an email reminder of it, and then 2 weeks later, I'll send them a WhatsApp asking them a question about it, and then I'll always retrieve it at the start of the next one. So learning tools like that have been very, very helpful to me to wrestle down this massive monster of things that need to be learned.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the challenges, isn't it? There's so much that can be learned, and there's so much content out there in terms of podcasts, TED Talks, YouTube, online learning. There's a lot of it. And you're right, there has been a massive explosion on the online stuff. And what I really liked about your learning tools is actually the simplicity of them, that it doesn't have to be complicated, that you can just write down 3 things afterwards and keep it somewhere and then refer back and refresh your mind. And I quite like your first one. And I think I might need to do a little bit of this, is sometimes I read things or listen to things and I think I have to like really understand it all and get into the detail of it. But the idea that some of it you can just say, actually, it doesn't really fit into my big 3 things. So I can let some of those go and I can just enjoy the process of listening versus thinking I have to really learn these things. And that's a good way of giving your brain a bit of space.
Yes, and folks, everybody listening to this is going to be exactly the same. The odd thing is that you have a possibility to recall it much better when you do it like that. Is if you just let something go, you can recall it quite easily. But when you're under pressure to learn it all the time, and you don't have a learning structure in your own mind, then it becomes very hard, and it becomes a pressure. And in regards to the simple word, Beth, simple's great. The sophistication is in the simplicity of things for people.
Definitely. And sometimes making things simple is the hardest thing you can possibly do.
Absolutely.
But when you do it, it's the best thing you can do.
And that's what it's one of the things the coaches will always say is when they listen to a Jurgen Klopp or a Pep Guardiola or these famous guys, and you ask them what they picked up from it, they'll say, "Oh, it's so simple what they do. It's so simple what they do." Because it is simple what they do, but behind it is a lot of critical thinking, of course. But you're right, it's simple.
And often with the simple stuff, the outcome is what looks simple. Like if you've created something or you're putting it out there in the big wide world, it's 20 or 30 or 40 years of experience you put into your simple 3-step model. Yeah. But it took you 30 years to create that model, and you didn't have it when you first started. And you learned from all of the things that you got wrong and the awkward, horrible moments and the failures and the like lying in bed at 3:00 in the morning wondering how the hell you get through the day.
Absolutely. When people pay me for my private coaching, they're not paying me for that 60 minutes. They're paying me for that 40 years.
Exactly, the 40 years of learning that maybe they don't need to take 40 years.
Absolutely.
Maybe they only take 20 years. Yes, and maybe when they're then coaching someone, it only takes 10 years. And but with that, we all need to make our own mistakes as well, don't we? We need to be able to learn through getting things wrong as well as getting things right.
Yep.
And for me, some of my best learning points are the things where you think, oh God, that was a massive fail.
Yeah, well, we have those moments when we reflect back and cringe, don't we?
Yeah. And what I hope over life is that you have slightly more moments where you smile than when you cringe. But some weeks it doesn't work like that.
Or lose your memory.
That's awful. Unless you lose the memory of all the awful bits.
Lose the memory of all the bad things.
Yeah. Right, Simon, it's been Amazing talking to you and all your advice and guidance. I have some quick fire questions for you to finish off with. Are you ready for them?
Well, I hope I'm ready for them, because if I'm not, I've not been, I've not paid much attention. But go ahead.
I'm going to go ahead. So, question one. For you personally, as an individual in your life, what is always guaranteed to bring you some work joy?
Finding the passion in what I do.
Yeah, great. Question two. What book are you currently reading?
Okay. So I've got 3 books on the go right now. And 2 of them are by a guy called Michael Bungay Stanya. One is called The Coaching Habit, and the other one is called The Advice Monster. Michael's not from sport, but he's a tremendous author. And I also signed up to his a Year of Living Brilliantly, which is a free course where you get a video clip, an inspirational video clip every week. So those so the Coaching Habit and the Advice Monster, and the other book I'm reading is a book by Sam Walker. It's called The Captain Class, which is a research into the greatest sports teams of all time and what were the real drivers of success. And it's all about the captain and the personal characteristics of that captain, and it's very surprising in terms of leadership what actually makes the difference. So those are my 3 books.
Brilliant. You're a bit like me, Simon. I never just have one book on the go. There's always a multitude going on. Right. Question 3. What is the best or most useful bit of advice that someone has given you that you always come back to?
Get over it. That's probably one I would, in my early days, somebody challenged me to get over something. And it really shifted the dial in terms of the way I looked at things. No complaints, no limits, no blame.
It's great.
And it was harsh at the time, but I remember it well, and I remember the impact it had on me. Get over it.
I love it. I
Move
have
on.
a very good friend of mine who I have known for a very long time, who a long time ago said the words to me, exactly how long is it going to take you to get over it? And when someone puts it to you like that, you kind of go, oh yeah, how long am I going to waste just thinking or overthinking or being annoyed about this? So great advice. Just get over it. Tough, but in the right zone. Okay, and now let's think about your advice for our listeners. Can you give our listeners one bit of really simple, practical advice of something they could go and do right now, do it tomorrow, do it regularly, that you think would help them get more joy into their work life?
Well, I'm going to go back to the piece on the vulnerability here, Beth, and I'm going to say the one piece of advice I would give to you is go and ask people what they think.
Yeah.
And see, and then watch what happens. Pay attention to what happens. And of course, listen.
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't used the word listening, but it is fundamental. But one bit of go and ask people what they think more often. Ask people what they think, and you'll see what happens.
Amazing. Thank you. Finally, from me, where can people find out more about you, your philosophy, what you do, etc.?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm also on Twitter. People can contact me that way, and I'm very happy to speak to people. I love sharing and listening to what others are doing as well, and listening to their ideas. So I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter. I am not really out there in the social media world and the book world and the podcast and website world, but I am contactable via LinkedIn and Twitter.
Brilliant.
And my Twitter handle is SI10S, which is Psy Tennis. If you haven't worked that out. And I'm also on LinkedIn.
Cool. And what we'll do is we'll put those links into the notes about the podcast on the website, etc., so that people can go and click on them rather than trying to find you individually on LinkedIn, etc. Simon, it's been amazing. Thank you so much for coming on and being part of the WorkJoy Jam. It's been a great conversation. I love your inspiration, and I'm totally going to take some of those things around those 3 bits, that advice, and use some of it for myself. And I really hope some of our listeners will too. So thank you very much.
Pleasure, Beth. Great to listen to you and hear and make contact with you. I can't wait to listen to these podcasts. This is going to be one in the list that I'm going to follow. Not me, but the other ones.
Well, you can listen to your own one as well, and then listen to everyone else's as well. Thanks, Simon.
Okay, thanks, Beth.
Thank you for listening to that episode with Simon Jones. I definitely took a lot from my conversation with Simon and some really practical tips. But the one I'm going to come back to, and I think it's a really great tool that Simon suggested, is the 3 things option. So whenever you're at an event, obviously at the moment many people are doing events online or meetings online, narrowing it down, thinking about what are the 3 core things, the 3 core takeaways, and popping them down so that you can always come back and remember what they are. I don't know about you, but so many people are in the zone of going from one meeting to the next meeting, to an event, to a session, to trying to manage their day. And to remember everything is so impossible, but to write down and really consolidate those 3 things, I think, is a great suggestion. I personally, because I'm an old-fashioned paper kind of a girl, would write it in a notepad, so I'm going to get a notepad to start doing this. But what a great bit of advice there from Simon. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the WorkJoy Jam. Do go and listen to some of our other amazing, different, interesting, insightful guests that come along. You can find more about WorkJoy at www.createworkjoy.com, and we're on the Instagram. So if you want to, and if we would love it if you could let us know what you think, tag yourself in some actions and tag us and tell us what you're up to. Thank you very much for listening to the WorkJoy Jam.